What's the creepiest thing you found in your backyard? My dad started digging holes big enough to stand in our backyard 3 weeks ago, and when I asked him about it, he refused to answer. He'd come home from his job at the insurance company, change into old clothes, and spend hours out there with a shovel, digging these random holes that he'd fill back in before coming inside covered in dirt and sweat. At first, I didn't think much about it because Dad had always been weird about yard work, going through phases where he'd obsess over some project for a few weeks, then abandon it completely. But this was different. He wasn't planting anything or building anything. He was digging holes, measuring distances from the fence with this old tape measure, then filling them back in and starting somewhere else. I woke up at 2 a.m. one night for water and saw the motion sensor light on in the backyard. Dad was out there in his boxers and a t-shirt, digging frantically like he was racing against time. I watched from the kitchen window as he dug down maybe 3 feet, felt around in the hole with his hands, then filled it back in and moved to another spot. When he came inside an hour later, he jumped when he saw me in the kitchen. "Couldn't sleep," he said, washing his hands in the sink until the water ran clear. "Why were you digging in the middle of the night?" I asked. "Thought I heard something," he said. "Maybe a water pipe leaking." "Go back to bed." But there was dirt under his fingernails for days, and he'd started locking his home office when he left for work, which he'd never done before. The holes kept appearing. Some were shallow, barely a foot deep. Others went down so far I couldn't see the bottom from my bedroom window. He'd moved from the back corner of the yard toward the house, creating this weird pattern that made no sense. When I offered to help, he said no so quickly and firmly that it actually hurt my feelings. "I'm just trying to fix something," he said. "Old property stuff from before we moved here. Nothing interesting. We'd lived in this house for 10 years. Whatever he was looking for had been there the whole time." I started watching him more carefully. He'd pace the backyard before digging, looking at this old piece of paper he kept in his pocket. Sometimes he'd stand in one spot for minutes, just staring at the ground like he was trying to remember something. Once I saw him crying while he dug, tears running down his face as he threw dirt over his shoulder. "Is everything okay?" I asked him at dinner, and he looked at me with these exhausted eyes. "Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried," he said, then laughed like he'd made a joke. But it wasn't funny and we both knew it. I waited until he left for work on Tuesday and then went to his office. The door was locked, but I knew where he hid the spare key, inside the fake rock by the front door that he'd used for the office ever since Mom left. His desk was covered in old photographs of the house from before we lived there, printed from some real estate website. In the photos, the backyard looked different. There was a sandbox in the corner where Dad had been digging most frantically, a swing set where he dug last week. I decided I had to know what was going on, so I went to the garage and grabbed a shovel. Dad wouldn't be home for 4 hours. I started digging where the sandbox used to be, where Dad had dug the deepest holes. The ground was soft from all his digging, easy to move. I went down 2 feet, then 3, then 4. My arms were burning and I was covered in dirt, but I kept going. At 5 feet, I hit something hard. Not a rock or a pipe, but something wooden. I cleared the dirt away with my hands and found the corner of what looked like an old toy box, the kind made of plastic that looked like wood. It was cracked and faded, but still intact. I dug around it, clearing more dirt, my heart pounding so hard I felt sick. The box was maybe 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, kid-sized, the kind parents used to store toys in playrooms. The lid was held down with a bungee cord that had mostly rotted away. I pulled the cord off and it crumbled in my hands. I should have called someone. Should have stopped right there. But I had to know what Dad had been looking for. What had made him cry while he dug in our backyard in the middle of the night. I lifted the lid, and there it was, crammed in and folded in on itself, a human body. My dad had killed someone. He'd be home in 30 minutes. What would I say to him? I stand in the hole with my phone in my hand, and the screen shows 4:17 p.m., which means Dad could walk through that back gate in maybe 5 minutes. My thumb hovers over the emergency call button, but I can't make myself press it because calling 911 means police cars and questions, and Dad in handcuffs and our whole life exploding into something I can't take back. The body in the toy box is folded wrong, knees pulled up to chest, and I can see fabric that might have been clothes and bones that are definitely real, and I know someone's family has been looking for this person for years, probably. I climb out of the hole and my legs shake so bad I almost fall, but I grab the edge and pull myself up onto the grass. I need pictures before I do anything else, because what if Dad comes home and makes this disappear somehow? What if I call the police and they don't believe me or can't find it again? I open my phone camera and my hands won't stop shaking, but I force myself to take photos of everything. The toy box with its faded plastic wood pattern and cracked lid. The hole from different angles showing how deep it goes. The tape measure I dropped next to it showing 5 feet down. The surrounding yard with the fence and the house in the background, so there's proof of where this is. I take maybe 20 photos and my hands are shaking so bad some of them come out blurry, but I keep going. I photograph the bungee cord pieces on the ground and the dirt piles and even the shovel leaning against the fence. My phone says 4:21 now and I'm running out of time. I grab the lid and lower it back onto the box as carefully as I can, and the weight of what I'm doing hits me all at once. I'm covering this back up. I'm reburying someone who's been buried for who knows how long. I pick up the shovel and start pushing dirt back into the hole, and every shovelful makes me feel worse. This was someone's kid, probably. Someone's sister or brother, and I'm putting dirt on top of them again like they don't matter. But I need the yard to look normal when Dad gets here, because if he knows I found this, he might run or destroy evidence, or I don't even know what. The dirt falls in and covers the box, and I work as fast as I can. My arms are burning and sweat runs down my face and mixes with tears I didn't know I was crying. I pack the dirt down with the back of the shovel and try to make it look like all the other filled-in holes Dad's been making. By 4:26, the hole is filled, and I've spread the extra dirt around and raked it smooth with my fingers. I run to the back door and kick off my muddy shoes and go straight to the kitchen sink to wash my hands. The water runs brown and I scrub under my nails, but the dirt won't all come out. I dry my hands on a towel and pull out my phone and scroll to Mom's number. We haven't talked in 8 months. Not since she moved out and said she needed space from both of us to figure out her life. The phone rings 4 times and goes to voicemail, and I hear her voice say to leave a message. I try to sound normal, but my voice comes out shaky and too fast. "Mom, it's me. Something's really wrong with Dad. Please call me back as soon as you can. It's urgent." I hang up and stare at the phone and know that message probably sounded crazy, but I don't know who else to call. I open the voice memo app and hit record and start talking quietly in case Dad comes in. Today is Tuesday. It's 4:28 p.m., and I just found human remains in our backyard. My dad has been digging holes for 3 weeks, and I found old photos in his locked office showing the yard before we moved here. There was a sandbox where he's been digging the most, and I dug there today and found a toy box buried 5 feet down with a body inside. I'm recording this in case something happens to me, or in case the evidence disappears. The body is still there right now. I just covered it back up. Dad will be home any minute, and I don't know what to do. I list everything I can remember about the past 3 weeks, the midnight digging and the crying and the locked office and the measuring. I talk for maybe 3 minutes until I hear a car door slam outside and my whole body goes cold. I stop the recording and shove my phone in my pocket and look at my hands, and there's still dirt under my nails. Dad's car is in the driveway, and he's 18 minutes early, and I can see him through the window walking toward the back door. I turn on the sink and scrub my hands again as hard as I can. He comes in through the back door and looks at me standing at the sink, and his face does this thing where he's trying to look normal, but something's wrong in his eyes. "You okay? You look pale." I turn off the water and dry my hands and try to make my voice work right. "Yeah, just tired. Long day." He sets his work bag on the counter, and I can see dirt on his pants from this morning before he left for work. He keeps looking at me like he's trying to figure out if something's wrong, and I need to say something normal. Barry stopped by earlier. Dad's whole body goes stiff, and his face loses color for just a second before he controls it. Barry from down the street. He was asking about all the yard work you've been doing. Seemed really curious about what you're looking for out there. Dad's jaw tightens, and he opens the fridge like he needs something to do with his hands. Just fixing some drainage issues. Old house problems. His voice sounds too careful, too measured. Nothing interesting. He pulls out a water bottle and drinks half of it in one go, and I watch his throat move and think about how I've known this person my whole life, but right now he feels like a stranger. "I need to shower," he says, and walks past me toward the stairs. I wait until I hear the bathroom door close and the water start running upstairs. Then I grab my phone and my keys and slip out the front door as quietly as I can. I walk fast down our street and turn the corner and keep going for 2 blocks until I'm standing on the corner by the old pharmacy where Dad definitely can't see me from the house. I pull out my phone and my hands are shaking so bad I almost drop it. I dial 911 and the phone rings twice before someone answers. 911, what's your emergency? I found human remains in my backyard. I give her our address and she asks me to repeat it, and I do. The dispatcher's voice stays calm and professional. Are you safe right now? Can you describe what you found? I think so. I'm not at the house right now. I dug a hole in my backyard and found a toy box buried 5 feet down with human remains inside. My father has been digging in that exact spot for weeks, and I don't know what he'll do when police show up. The dispatcher asks me to stay on the line, and I hear her typing. Officers are on their way to your location. Can you stay where you are and away from the house? My father's home right now. He doesn't know I called. I don't think he'll hurt me, but I don't know. She tells me to stay away from the house until officers arrive and asks if I have somewhere safe to wait. I tell her I'm 2 blocks away on the corner. She says officers should be there in less than 10 minutes and asks me to stay on the line. But I tell her I need to go back because if Dad realizes I'm gone, he might do something. She tries to tell me to wait, but I hang up and start walking back toward the house. My legs feel wrong, like they might stop working and I have to force myself to keep moving. I get back to the house and slip in through the front door and hear the shower still running upstairs. I go to the kitchen and Dad's work bag is still on the counter where he left it. I stand there trying to look normal and trying to breathe normal and failing at both. The shower turns off upstairs and I hear Dad moving around in the bathroom. I open the cabinet and grab a glass and fill it with water, even though I'm not thirsty because I need to look like I'm doing something normal. Dad comes down the stairs in clean clothes with his hair still wet, and his hands are clean for the first time in weeks. He goes to the stove and fills the kettle and turns on the burner. Want some tea? No thanks. He gets down a mug and a tea bag and moves around the kitchen like everything is completely normal, but there's something careful in how he's doing it. Like he's performing the actions of making tea instead of just making tea. The kettle starts to heat up and he leans against the counter and looks at the backyard through the window. Yard's looking better. Got most of the drainage issues sorted out. I don't say anything and he glances at me and then back at the yard. The kettle starts to whistle. I turn away from the window and force the words out before I lose my nerve. Those old photos in your office, the ones showing the sandbox, why do you have those? Dad's hand stops halfway to the kettle and he sets his mug down on the counter too carefully, like he's worried it might break. Just some old property surveys I needed to check for work. Insurance stuff. Nothing interesting. His voice sounds wrong, too flat and measured, like he's reading from a script he memorized. The kettle keeps whistling and he doesn't move to turn it off. I watch steam rising from the spout and think about how everything in this kitchen looks normal, but nothing feels normal anymore. He finally reaches over and clicks off the burner and the whistle dies down to nothing. Blue lights flash through the front windows and Dad freezes completely, the kettle still in his hand. His face drains of all color like someone pulled a plug and let everything drain out. 3 police cars are pulling up outside our house, and I watch him understand what's happening. Watch his eyes move from the window to me. The look on his face is something I'll never forget. This mix of shock and hurt and resignation all at once. He knows I called them. He sets the kettle down and just stands there staring at me while red and blue lights wash across the kitchen walls. I move toward the front door before the officers can knock because I need to control this. Need to be the one who speaks first. Dad follows me into the hallway but stays back near the kitchen, not saying anything, just staring at the back of my head like he's trying to understand how we got here. I open the door and 3 officers are standing on the porch with their hands near their belts. I'm the one who called. There's something buried in the backyard I need to show you. The officer in front nods and asks if everyone in the house is safe, and I say yes, it's just me and my father. I hear Dad breathing behind me in the hallway, this quiet, rapid breathing like he's been running. The officers ask if they can come inside, and I step back to let them in. They look past me at Dad, and the lead officer asks him to stay in the living room while they secure the scene. Dad nods too quickly, too quietly, like a kid who got caught doing something wrong. One officer stays with him while 2 others follow me through the kitchen toward the back door. I point through the window at the filled-in hole where I dug this morning and tell them that's where the remains are, about 5 feet down in a toy box. The officers pull on gloves and head outside, and I watch them from the kitchen window as they start examining the area. Dad sits on the couch with the officer standing nearby, and he's not looking at anything, just staring at his hands in his lap. More cars arrive over the next hour. Officers string yellow tape around the backyard and set up bright lights even though it's still afternoon. They bring out shovels and equipment and start carefully removing dirt from where I filled the hole back in. A detective arrives 40 minutes after the first officers and walks through the house looking at everything before coming to find me in the kitchen. She introduces herself as Detective Williams and asks if I'm willing to give a statement. Yes, I say, because I want this on record before Dad tries to explain it away or make it sound like something other than what it is. She leads me out to her car and we sit in the front seats with the doors closed. The car smells like coffee and old French fries, and there's a clipboard between us. She asks me to start from the beginning and tell her everything I know. I tell her about the 3 weeks of digging, how Dad would come home from work and spend hours in the backyard making holes that he'd fill back in. I tell her about seeing him at 2 in the morning digging frantically like he was racing against time. I tell her about the locked office and the old photos showing the sandbox and swing set. I tell her about finding the toy box today and what was inside. Detective Williams writes everything down and asks questions about specific dates and times. I show her my phone photos of the toy box and the hole and the measurements I took before filling it back in. Her face gets harder as she looks through the photos, this professional mask dropping into place. This isn't some old pet burial, she says, more to herself than to me. No, I say, it's not. She asks if my father said anything about what he was looking for or why he was digging, and I tell her about his repeated phrase that he was trying to fix something. She writes that down and underlines it twice. After an hour of questions, Detective Williams asks if she can search my father's office. She says she can get a warrant, but it would be faster if he consents. I tell her to ask him, and we go back inside where Dad is still sitting on the couch. The officer with him steps aside and Detective Williams explains what she needs. Dad nods and says she can search whatever she wants, probably because refusing would make him look guilty of something worse. I watch through the office doorway as officers photograph his desk and carefully bag the old property photos. They find the piece of paper he kept in his pocket, the one he used to measure distances in the yard, and they bag that too. Everything gets labeled and documented and carried out to the cars. Dad doesn't watch any of it. He just sits there with his head down like he's waiting for something inevitable. The next morning, Detective Williams calls and asks if I can come to the station. I take the bus because I don't trust myself to drive and find her waiting in a small conference room. She slides a document across the table and tells me it's the summary of my statement from yesterday. I read through it, and seeing my own words typed out in official police language makes everything feel more real and more horrible. The document calls me the witness and Dad the resident, like we're strangers instead of family who've lived together for years. Every detail I gave her is there in clinical language about the subject's behavior and the witness's observations. I sign it at the bottom and she files it away. She shows me another document, just 2 pages, and explains it's the transcript from my father's interview last night. I read through it and feel anger building in my chest because he barely said anything. Question after question, and his answer is always the same. I was trying to fix something, over and over like a broken record. I was trying to fix something. The phrase makes me want to scream because it's not an answer, it's not an explanation. It's just more evasion and hiding. Detective Williams watches my face and asks if that phrase means anything specific to me. I tell her he said it once before when I asked about the digging, but I don't know what he meant by it. She makes a note and then pulls out another folder. "These are property records for your house," she says, spreading papers across the table. The house had different owners 20 years ago, a family with 2 teenagers who moved away suddenly in the middle of the school year. She points to the dates, and I feel my skin crawl because it means whoever is buried in our backyard has been there since before we ever lived there, since before we ever moved in and made this place our home. My father bought a house with a body already buried in the yard, and somehow he knew about it, or found out about it, and that's what all the digging was about. He was trying to move it or hide it better, or maybe just trying to convince himself it wasn't really there. Detective Williams asks if I knew about the previous owners, and I shake my head because Dad never mentioned them, never talked about the house's history at all. I get home an hour later and find Barry from 3 doors down standing on my porch talking to Detective Williams. Barry looks uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, and when he sees me, he gives this awkward wave. Detective Williams asks if I mind Barry giving his statement here, and I say it's fine. Barry tells her he remembers something from maybe 18 years ago, back when different people owned the house. He says there were rumors in the neighborhood about a teenager who went missing, a girl who was at some party and never came home. People talked about it for a few weeks, he says, but nothing ever got confirmed by police, and eventually everyone just stopped bringing it up. Detective Williams writes everything down and asks Barry specific questions about dates and names, but he can't remember much beyond the general story. After Barry leaves, I watch through the kitchen window as the forensics team works in the backyard under the bright lights they set up. They're pulling things out of the toy box now, bagging each item carefully. I see them extract what looks like pieces of clothing, faded and dirt-stained, and then something small that catches the light, a bracelet. The forensics tech holds it up to examine it before sliding it into an evidence bag, and I feel sick knowing someone wore that piece of jewelry, someone who had friends and family and a whole life ahead of them. My phone rings and it's Mom finally calling back. I step into the hallway and tell her everything in a rush, about finding the body, about Dad's reaction, about the police everywhere and the forensics team in our backyard right now. There's a long silence on the other end, and I think maybe the call dropped, but then Mom says she's coming over. Her voice sounds strange, tight and worried, and she tells me she needs to talk to me about something from Dad's past that she should have mentioned years ago. I ask what she means, but she says not over the phone, that she'll be there in 30 minutes. The house feels crowded with police moving through rooms and taking photos of everything. I sit on the stairs and wait for Mom, my mind racing through possibilities of what she might tell me. When she finally arrives, she hugs me tight in the doorway and I can feel her shaking. We go to my bedroom where it's quieter and she closes the door. Mom pulls me down to sit on the bed and tells me that Dad once said he covered for someone back before they got married, something that happened with his old work crew. She says it was years ago and he wouldn't give her details, just said it was something that haunted him and he wished he'd made different choices. She admits she always wondered if he meant something criminal, but she never pushed him to explain because she was scared of what he might say. I feel anger building because she knew Dad had some dark secret and she married him anyway. Brought me into a house that might have been hiding evidence the whole time. Mom sees my face and says she didn't know it was this serious, that she thought maybe he'd helped someone avoid a DUI or covered up a work accident. Detective Williams knocks on my door and asks if she can talk to me downstairs. She wants the copies of those backyard photos I found in Dad's office, the ones showing how the yard looked before we moved in. I pull up the photos on my phone and send them to her email address, my hands shaking as I type. Handing over evidence against my own father feels like a betrayal, even though I know it's the right thing to do. Detective Williams thanks me for being so cooperative and says most family members aren't this helpful in cases like this, which makes me feel worse somehow. The house phone rings and I hear Dad answer it in the kitchen. His voice drifts up the stairs, and I recognize the tone he uses for work calls. Someone from his office is asking why he didn't come in today, and Dad claims a family emergency, requesting immediate leave. His voice sounds hollow and defeated, like he's reading lines from a script. He knows his normal life just ended, that going back to his insurance job and pretending everything is fine isn't possible anymore. Mom stays until late evening, but eventually she has to leave for work in the morning. After she goes, I try to sleep in my room, but I can't stand being upstairs near Dad's bedroom. I grab a blanket and pillow and make a spot on the living room couch. The house feels different now, like the walls themselves are holding evidence and the floors are keeping secrets. I lie awake listening to Dad pace in his locked bedroom above me, his footsteps going back and forth for hours. Around midnight, his pacing finally stops and the house goes quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Detective Williams calls me early the next morning before I'm fully awake. She tells me the medical examiner has preliminary findings about the remains. They're likely from an adolescent, not a young child like the toy box size originally suggested. This detail changes everything in my head because it means we're not talking about some random tragedy, but possibly that missing teenager Barry mentioned. An actual person with a name and a family who spent years wondering what happened. Detective Williams also mentions they received an anonymous tip on their hotline yesterday that specifically named my father. She can't tell me what the tip said exactly, just that someone out there knows something about what Dad did. I feel paranoid suddenly, wondering who else has been carrying this secret around the neighborhood all these years. How many people knew there was a body buried in our backyard and never said anything? That evening I find Dad in the kitchen making coffee like it's a normal day. I walk in and tell him I know the remains are from a teenager that Detective Williams told me. I ask him directly if he killed someone and my voice comes out louder than I meant it to. Dad's face crumples and he starts crying, his whole body shaking. He says he didn't kill anyone, repeating it over and over like if he says it enough times I'll believe him. But when I ask what he did do, what his role was in all this, he just shakes his head and won't explain anything. Mom shows up again the next evening without calling first, and I hear her car in the driveway before Dad does. She walks into the kitchen where Dad and I are sitting in opposite corners avoiding each other, and she looks at both of us with this tired expression like she already knows this is going to be bad. The three of us end up at the kitchen table in this terrible silence that stretches on for minutes, nobody knowing what to say or where to start. Mom keeps looking at Dad like she's trying to figure out who he really is, and finally she asks him about the old crew from his landscaping days, the guys he used to work with before he got the insurance job. Dad's face goes completely hard like someone just slapped him, and he says some things are better left alone in this flat voice that doesn't sound like him at all. Mom leans forward and says she needs to understand what happened, that she deserves to know after all these years, but Dad just pushes back from the table and walks out of the room. Mom sits there for another minute staring at the empty chair where Dad was sitting. Then she grabs her purse and leaves without saying goodbye to either of us. I watch her taillights disappear down the street and feel this weird mix of relief and abandonment, like everyone's leaving me alone to deal with this nightmare. Detective Williams shows up 2 days later with papers in her hand and 2 other officers behind her, and she tells Dad she has a formal search warrant for his electronic devices and personal records. Dad doesn't argue or ask questions, just steps aside and lets them into his office like he's been expecting this. I stand in the hallway watching them photograph everything before they touch it, the way they carefully unplug his old external hard drive from the back of his desktop computer. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. They put the hard drive in a clear evidence bag and label it with a marker, and I see Dad's shoulders slump when they carry it past him toward the front door. He knows what's on that drive, knows what they're going to find, and his whole body language changes like he just gave up fighting. After they leave, Dad goes upstairs to his room and closes the door, and I hear him pacing back and forth for hours. 2 days later, Detective Williams calls and asks if I can come down to the station to look at some evidence they recovered, and I drive there feeling sick to my stomach about what she's going to show me. She takes me to a small conference room and opens her laptop, pulling up scanned images of old emails from Dad's hard drive. The emails are from 20 years ago, sent between Dad and several other people whose names I don't recognize, and they talk about a bonfire at this address and cleaning up the mess. One email says they need to make sure everything is buried deep enough that nobody will ever find it by accident, and another one talks about using the toy box because it was the right size and already there. The casual tone of these emails makes me feel cold all over, like they're discussing yard work or weekend plans instead of hiding a body. They use phrases like taking care of the problem and making sure the property stays clean, and I realize these people thought they were being careful by not using specific words. Detective Williams points out the dates and the sender names, explaining that they're trying to locate all these people now for interviews. I drive home in a daze and park in the driveway, and Barry from down the street walks over before I can get to my front door. He says he needs to tell me something he's been thinking about since the police came, something he remembers from a long time ago. Barry tells me that about 18 years ago, maybe 19, He woke up in the middle of the night and saw several trucks parked on our street until after 3 a.m. He looked out his window because the noise woke him up, and he saw people moving things in the dark between the trucks in our backyard. He says he thought it was weird at the time, but figured it was construction materials or landscaping supplies, so he went back to bed and forgot about it until now. Hearing Barry describe that night makes everything feel more real and more horrible, because it means other people saw what was happening and nobody thought to question it. I thank him for telling me and go inside, and an hour later, Detective Williams calls again saying the forensics report came back with new information. She asks if I can come back to the station, and when I get there, she shows me the full forensics analysis of the bracelet they found in the toy box. The bracelet has initials engraved on the inside that they were able to read after cleaning, and Detective Williams tells me the initials match a girl named Sarah Chen, who went missing 18 years ago. She pulls out a folder and shows me Sarah's missing person poster, and I see a smiling teenager who looks so alive in the photo, with long, dark hair and braces and this bright, happy expression. The poster says she was last seen at a party on the north side of town, that she was 16 years old, that her family is desperate for any information. Detective Williams explains that Sarah's case went cold after a few months because there were no leads and no body, but the family never stopped looking for answers. I stare at Sarah's face in the poster and feel this crushing weight knowing what happened to her while her family spent 18 years hoping she was still alive somewhere. That night I can't sleep, so I pull out my laptop and start searching for information about Sarah Chen online. I find dozens of posts from her sister Josie on missing person forums and social media pages, begging for tips and keeping Sarah's case active year after year. The most recent post is from 3 months ago, where Josie writes that she still checks her phone every day hoping for news, that she'll never give up until she knows what happened to her sister. I scroll back through years of posts and see Josie's determination never fading, how she marks every birthday Sarah missed and every anniversary of her disappearance. I click on older forum posts where Josie describes Sarah as funny and kind, how she loved art class and wanted to be a teacher someday, how she was last seen at a party getting into a car with people she knew. Josie writes about how the family never gave up hope, how they kept Sarah's room exactly the same just in case she came home, how their mom died 5 years ago still believing Sarah might return. The weight of knowing what happened when Josie doesn't feels unbearable, like I'm carrying this terrible secret that belongs to her family but I can't share yet because it's evidence in an active investigation. I read through post after post where Josie begs anyone who knows anything to please come forward, and I want to reach through the screen and tell her I'm sorry, that I found her sister, that at least now there can be answers. The next morning I find Dad in the kitchen making coffee and I walk right up to him and tell him I know about Sarah Chen, that I saw her missing person poster, that I read what her sister has been going through for 18 years. Dad sets down his coffee cup and admits he knew Sarah's older friend from his landscaping days, that he was at the party where something went wrong. He says Sarah died accidentally and someone panicked about calling police, but he won't say who or explain his exact role in what happened next. I lose my temper and start yelling at him for minimizing what happened, for saying someone panicked like that somehow excuses burying a child in a toy box and letting her family suffer for 18 years. I tell him that Sarah had a sister who never stopped looking for her, a mom who died still hoping her daughter would come home, and all he can say is someone panicked like that makes it okay. Dad flinches but doesn't defend himself or argue back, just sits there taking my anger like he's been waiting 18 years for someone to be this mad at him. Later that day, Detective Williams calls Dad's phone and tells him he needs to come in for another interview, and I watch him put on his shoes and jacket with this defeated slowness. When he comes back 3 hours later, he looks even worse, and I find out from Detective Williams the next day that they confronted him with phone records showing he searched for Josie Chen's name online several months ago. Dad couldn't explain why he was looking up the victim's sister, couldn't come up with any good reason for researching her current life and online presence. I realize in that moment that Dad's been planning to dig up the evidence before anyone else found it, that he saw Josie's posts keeping the case alive and got scared that new attention might lead investigators back to our property. That evening, I go back to the house one last time to pack my things. Dad sits at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he's not drinking, and I walk past him to my room without saying anything. I throw clothes into my old duffel bag, grab my laptop and charger, take the photos from my desk. My hands shake as I zip the bag closed because this feels permanent somehow, like I'm not just leaving for a few days but actually moving out for good. When I come back downstairs with the bag over my shoulder, Dad looks up at me with these empty eyes, and I tell him I'm staying with Mom for a while. He just nods once like he expected this, like he's been waiting for me to leave ever since I found Sarah. I wait for him to argue or ask me to stay, but he doesn't say anything, just goes back to staring at his coffee. I walk out the front door feeling this weird mix of relief that I'm getting away from that house and guilt that I'm abandoning him when everything's falling apart. Mom picks me up at the corner and I don't look back as we drive away. 3 days later, I'm at Mom's apartment flipping channels when I see our house on the local news. The address is blurred out, but I recognize the fence and the tree in the front yard immediately. The reporter stands on the sidewalk talking about human remains found in a suburban backyard and an ongoing investigation. My phone starts going crazy with texts from people I haven't talked to in months, all asking if I'm okay and what's happening. Someone from high school messages me saying they saw the news and is that my house. A cousin I barely know calls to ask if Dad's in trouble. I realize our private nightmare is becoming public knowledge, and soon everyone will know what happened in our backyard. Mom sits down next to me and turns off the TV, but my phone keeps buzzing with more messages. People want details, want to know the story, want to hear what it was like finding a body. I turn my phone off completely because I can't handle everyone treating this like gossip when Sarah was a real person who had a family. The next morning, Detective Williams calls and asks if I can come to the precinct without telling Dad. I meet her in a small room with a table and 2 chairs, and she spreads out papers showing all the holes in Dad's story. She points to his statement where he said he didn't know Sarah personally, but then shows me the emails mentioning her name specifically. She shows me phone records proving Dad called one of the other guys from that party just 2 weeks before he started digging. She walks me through every place his timeline doesn't match up with what other evidence suggests. Detective Williams says she's building a case for accessory after the fact, and asks if I've heard Dad say anything else about that night. I tell her about him crying while he dug and his comment about the past not staying buried. She writes everything down in her notebook, and I feel like I'm helping put my own father in prison, but I can't stop answering her questions. Before I leave, Detective Williams opens a folder and shows me her case notes. Right there in official police handwriting, it says, "Possible accessory after the fact. Helped conceal body and evidence." Seeing those words written down about Dad makes everything more real somehow. Until now, it's been interviews and questions and digging, but this is actual legal language about actual charges. I ask her what that means for Dad, and she explains accessory after the fact. In cases like this can carry serious prison time, maybe 5 to 10 years depending on what the prosecutor decides. She says they're still investigating everyone involved and building the timeline of that night, but Dad's role in the burial is clear from his own admissions. I walk out of the precinct feeling sick because up until this moment, I kept thinking maybe Dad would just get probation or community service, but now I understand he could actually go to prison for years. That night I can't sleep, so I search for Josie Chen online again. I find her advocacy page where she posts updates about Sarah's case, and I see her contact information listed at the bottom. My hands shake as I open a new message and type carefully that I'm connected to new information about Sarah's disappearance. I don't give any details about what I found or where because Detective Williams told me the investigation is still active. I just say I'm willing to speak with her if she wants, and that I hope this can bring some answers her family deserves. My finger hovers over the send button for a full minute before I finally press it. The message goes through and I stare at my phone wondering if I just did the right thing, or if I'm making everything more complicated. Josie responds 53 minutes later. Her message is short, just asking if we can meet somewhere public and giving me her phone number. I text her and we arrange to meet at a coffee shop downtown the next afternoon. I barely sleep that night because I keep rehearsing what to say to someone whose sister has been buried in my backyard for 18 years. How do you apologize for something like that? How do you explain that you lived in that house for 10 years not knowing what was under the ground? I practice different ways to start the conversation, but everything sounds wrong. By morning, I'm exhausted, but I get dressed and take the bus downtown to meet her. The coffee shop is busy with the lunch crowd when I arrive. Josie is already there at a corner table, and I recognize her from her profile photo. She stands up when she sees me, and we shake hands awkwardly before sitting down. I tell her as much as I'm allowed to about finding the toy box and calling police and what's happening with the investigation. She starts crying halfway through, and I hand her napkins from the dispenser on the table. She thanks me for coming forward, says her family has waited so long for any information about what happened to Sarah. Then she pulls out her phone and shows me photos of Sarah from before she went missing. Sarah at her 8th grade graduation, Sarah painting in art class, Sarah laughing with friends at the beach. Josie tells me stories about her sister, how Sarah wanted to be a teacher and loved helping younger kids with their homework, how she was funny and kind and always remembered people's birthdays. Listening to Josie talk about Sarah as a real person, instead of just remains in a box, makes everything hurt more, because now I can picture who was buried in our yard all those years. 3 weeks after I found Sarah, Detective Williams calls to tell me the medical examiner officially confirmed the remains are Sarah Chen. They compared DNA from the remains with a sample Josie provided and got a definite match. Detective Williams says she's holding a press conference that afternoon to announce the identification, and I should probably stay away from the house because media will be there. I watch the press conference on TV from Mom's apartment. Detective Williams stands at a podium with Josie next to her and announces that Sarah Chen has been found after 18 years. She thanks the family for their cooperation and asks anyone with information about Sarah's death to come forward. The news shows old photos of Sarah and footage of our house with police tapes still around the backyard. I feel numb watching it all play out on screen, like I'm watching someone else's life instead of my own. 2 days after the press conference, a man named Sawyer Ellis contacts police saying he worked with Dad back then and knows what happened. Detective Williams calls to tell me about it. Sawyer told investigators that Dad helped bury Sarah but didn't kill her, that it was someone else at the party who caused her death, and Dad was pressured into helping cover it up. He says there were 4 people involved total and gives police names of everyone who was there. This information changes things because it means Dad wasn't acting alone and maybe wasn't the most guilty person involved. Detective Williams says they're following up on Sawyer's statement and trying to locate the other people he named. I feel this weird mixture of relief that Dad might not have killed Sarah and anger that he still chose to help bury her instead of calling police. The next week, Detective Williams asks me to come back to the precinct. She shows me something they found on Dad's computer, a draft email in his outbox that he wrote to Josie but never sent. The email is dated from 6 months ago, right around when Dad started acting strange. In it, Dad apologizes for what happened and says he's carried the guilt every day since that night. He writes that he knows sorry isn't enough and nothing can bring Sarah back, but he wanted Josie to know her sister didn't suffer and didn't die alone. Reading his unsent words makes me so angry I have to stand up and walk around the room. All this time, Dad had remorse, had guilt, had the ability to give Josie answers, but he chose to keep it secret. He wrote this whole apology, but didn't have the courage to actually send it. Detective Williams watches me pace and says, remorse without action is just cowardice, and I realize that's exactly what Dad's been doing for 18 years, feeling bad but not doing anything to make it right. 2 days after reading Dad's unsent apology, Detective Williams calls and asks me to come back to the precinct. She sits across from me in the same interview room and slides a consent form across the table. She wants to know if I'd be willing to record any conversations with Dad in case he admits more details about that night. My stomach twists because it feels like I'm becoming a spy, like I'm betraying what's left of our relationship. But I think about Sarah and Josie and I sign the form. Detective Williams walks me through how to do it legally, explaining that I need to be part of the conversation and that I have to tell Dad I'm recording if the law requires it in our state. She shows me how to use a voice recording app on my phone, how to make sure it's actually capturing audio, how to keep myself safe by staying in public places. She gives me her direct number and tells me to call immediately if Dad says anything that makes me feel unsafe or if he tries to leave town. 3 nights later, my phone buzzes at 1 a.m. with a text from Dad. The message says he wants to turn himself in but needs to talk to me first, alone, before he does it. I stare at the screen for 10 minutes, feeling that old loyalty pulling at me, the part that still remembers him teaching me to ride a bike and helping with homework. But I also remember Sarah folded into that toy box and I text back that I'll only meet him in a public place. He responds asking where, and I can almost hear the desperation in his words even through text. I tell him I need time to think about it and put my phone face down on the nightstand. The next morning I text him again and say we can meet, but only at a location I choose. He agrees without arguing. I text Detective Williams before responding to Dad, telling her about his messages and his request to meet. She calls me within minutes and we talk through the plan. I tell Dad we'll meet at the police station lobby where there are cameras everywhere and officers walking past constantly. I explain through text that I won't meet him somewhere private where he might try to talk me out of calling police or manipulate me into keeping more secrets. Dad texts back a simple okay, probably because he knows I won't come otherwise. I screenshot our entire text conversation and email it to Detective Williams. She replies saying she'll make sure officers know I'm coming and that I should arrive 15 minutes before Dad so she can brief me. The day of the meeting, I get to the police station early, and Detective Williams takes me to a small office where she shows me the security camera feed of the lobby. We watch together as Dad's car pulls into the parking lot. He sits in the driver's seat for almost 5 minutes before getting out. When he finally walks through the glass doors, he looks smaller than I remember, his shoulders hunched forward like he's carrying something heavy. His hair has more gray in it than it did a month ago. We go out to meet him and sit in orange plastic chairs near the front desk. Dad's hands shake as he folds them in his lap. He tells me he's ready to give a full statement, that he can't live with the secret anymore, that it's eating him alive. His voice cracks when he says he knows nothing. He tells police we'll make up for what he did, but at least the truth will finally be out. Detective Williams leads us to an interview room and starts recording Dad's official statement. I sit in the corner while Dad talks, his words coming out slowly at first, then faster as he goes. He admits he helped transport Sarah's body in the toy box after she died at a party. He says there was an accident, that a group of them were drinking and something went wrong and Sarah fell and hit her head. He describes how everyone panicked, how they were young and scared and stupid. He says they wrapped her in a blanket and put her in the toy box from the garage. Dad's voice drops to almost a whisper when he admits he helped bury the box in the backyard of the house he was helping renovate for the owners who were out of town. He says it was the worst decision of his life, that he's regretted it every single day for 18 years, that he thought about confessing 1,000 times but was too afraid. Then Dad names the other people who were there that night. He says Raymond Ellis was the one who suggested burying the body, that Raymond lived out of state now, somewhere in Nevada or Arizona. He mentions someone named Gavin who helped dig the hole but died 5 years ago in a car accident. Detective Williams writes everything down and asks follow-up questions about exact dates and locations and who else might have known. I sit there listening and realize that not everyone involved will face consequences for what they did. Gavin is dead, and Raymond might be impossible to find or prosecute after so many years. The information gives police new leads to follow, but it also means justice will be incomplete. That some people got away with it just by living long enough or moving far enough away. When Dad finishes his statement, Detective Williams stands up and tells him he's under arrest for accessory after the fact and obstruction of justice. She reads him his Miranda rights while I watch from my chair across the room, the words sounding exactly like they do on TV shows. Dad keeps his eyes on the floor as she asks if he understands his rights. 2 officers come in and put handcuffs on him, the metal clicking into place around his wrists. He doesn't look at me as they lead him out of the interview room toward the holding cells. I feel this weird mix of relief that he finally told the truth and heartbreak watching my father being taken away in handcuffs. Detective Williams puts her hand on my shoulder and asks if I'm okay. I nod, but I'm not really sure if I am. The following week, I go to Dad's arraignment at the courthouse downtown. I sit in the back row of the gallery and watch him stand next to his attorney, a woman named Miriam Ellis, who I've never met before. The judge reads the charges and asks how Dad pleads. His attorney says not guilty, even though we all know he's guilty, even though he just gave a complete confession. Miriam explains later that it's standard procedure, that they're protecting his rights and keeping options open for a plea deal. The judge sets bail at $50,000 with conditions including no contact with me, which means Dad can't call or text or come near me. Hearing the judge say those words out loud feels like getting the boundary I needed but couldn't set for myself. Dad's face stays blank through the whole proceeding, like he's not really there, like he's already checked out of his own life. A few days after the arraignment, Mom and I go back to the house with police permission to look for anything else that might be evidence. We wear gloves like the officers told us to and start in Dad's office. Mom finds the old tape measure in his desk drawer, the same one he used to pace the backyard with. I find his hand-drawn sketches of the yard tucked inside a folder labeled insurance papers. The sketches show measurements from the fence to various points, calculations in the margins, notes about depth and distance. Looking at these papers, I finally understand what his midnight digging was really about. He wasn't trying to find the toy box because he forgot where it was. He was trying to find it and move it before anyone else did, before some future homeowner or utility worker stumbled across it the way I did. All those holes he dug were attempts to relocate the evidence, to bury Sarah somewhere else where she'd never be found. Mom gets a call from someone at Dad's insurance company asking about his status. She steps outside to take it and comes back looking worried. She tells me they've placed Dad on administrative leave without pay while the criminal case proceeds. She mentions he'll struggle to make the mortgage payments on the house without his salary. I feel a small twinge of worry about his finances, about him losing everything on top of facing prison time. But then I remind myself that Sarah Chen's family has struggled with much worse for 18 years. They've lived with not knowing, with hoping and searching and grieving without closure. Dad chose to bury a child and keep that secret while Sarah's family suffered. Whatever financial problems he has now are consequences he brought on himself. The following week, Mom drives me to a therapy clinic on the east side of town where the fees are based on what you can afford to pay. The waiting room has mismatched chairs and old magazines and a water cooler that makes a loud humming sound. A woman comes out and introduces herself as Galena Pugh and leads me back to a small office with a desk and 2 chairs facing each other. She asks me to tell her what brought me here, and I start talking about finding the body, about Dad's digging, about calling the police and watching him get arrested. I talk for almost the full hour, and she mostly just listens and takes a few notes. When the session ends, she tells me that talking through traumatic events out loud to someone neutral can help make them feel more manageable. I schedule another appointment for next week and feel slightly less like I'm losing my mind as I walk back to Mom's car. 3 days later, I get an email from Josie with the subject line, Sarah's Vigil. She writes that Sarah's remains have been officially released to the family and they're holding a memorial vigil at a park near where Sarah went to high school. The email includes the date and time and ends with, "It would mean a lot if you could come, but I understand if it's too hard." I spend the next 4 days going back and forth about whether I should attend. Part of me thinks my presence would comfort Josie and honor Sarah's memory. Another part worries that seeing me will just remind everyone of how Sarah was found and where she'd been buried all these years. I finally text Josie directly and ask if she actually wants me there or if she's just being polite. She responds within minutes saying she genuinely wants me there, that my honesty about what I found gave her family something they needed. I tell her I'll be there. The vigil is on a Saturday evening and I arrive early to scope out the crowd. There are maybe 50 people gathered in a circle around a small table covered with photos of Sarah and bouquets of flowers. I stay toward the back and watch as people light candles and pass them around. When it's my turn, I light my candle from the person next to me and hold it while Josie's mom talks about Sarah's laugh and her kindness and how much they missed her. After the formal part ends, people mill around talking quietly and sharing memories. Josie finds me near the edge of the crowd and pulls me into a tight hug without saying anything at first. When she steps back, her eyes are wet, but she's smiling slightly. She tells me that my choice to call the police immediately instead of trying to handle things privately made all the difference. That if I'd confronted Dad first or tried to cover for him, the truth might never have come out. I don't know what to say, so I just nod, and she squeezes my hand before going back to her family. 2 days later, Detective Williams calls to tell me that police in another state have interviewed Raymond Ellis about his involvement in Sarah's death. She says prosecutors are reviewing whether they have enough evidence to charge him based on Dad's statement and some old phone records they recovered. The investigation is expanding beyond just Dad now, and I feel like justice is slowly catching up to everyone who was involved that night. A week after that, Mom gets a call from Dad's attorney, Miriam Ellis, asking about a possible plea deal. Miriam explains that Dad could cooperate fully with prosecutors and testify against Raymond in exchange for a reduced sentence. Mom asks what I think about it, and I tell her that Dad should do whatever lets him live with himself because I'm done making decisions about his life. That night, I sit down and write a long letter to Josie explaining how sorry I am that Sarah was buried in our yard for 18 years. I write about wishing I'd known sooner and hoping the truth helps, even though it can't bring Sarah back. I fold the letter and give it to Mom the next morning with instructions to only give it to Josie if she actually wants to read it. I tell Mom I won't force my guilt onto Josie's grief, and Mom nods like she understands. Later that week, Mom and I are having coffee at her apartment when she tells me clearly that she'll support me through everything, but she won't defend Dad's choices or pretend what he did was okay. She says she can love him and still hold him responsible for his actions. Her boundary setting helps me understand something I'd been struggling with, that loving someone and holding them accountable aren't opposites. You can do both at the same time. The next day I tell Mom I want to sell the house because I can't imagine living there again. She agrees to help me handle the practical details and sets up a meeting with a real estate agent who specializes in what she calls stigmatized properties. The agent's name is Carol, and she's honest with us about how hard it will be to sell. She says some buyers won't touch a house where something like this happened, but others won't care, or will see it as a chance to get a good deal. She gives us paperwork to fill out and tells us to think about our minimum price. A few days before we're supposed to list the house, I go back one last time during daylight to take photos of the yard for myself. The police tape is gone now and the grass is starting to grow back over where the hole was. I take pictures of the whole yard from different angles, so I'll remember this place and what it taught me about secrets and truth and how heavy silence can be. I'm putting my phone away when Josie calls. She tells me that Sarah finally has a proper burial plot at a cemetery across town and a headstone with her real name and dates. Not just missing since, but actual birth and death years. She thanks me again for calling the police that first day, instead of confronting Dad alone or trying to keep things quiet. She says my immediate choice to involve authorities made everything possible, that without it, Sarah might still be buried in that toy box with no one knowing where she was. I find a small apartment on the other side of town 3 weeks later and sign the lease the same day I see it because I need to be somewhere that isn't connected to any of this. The place is tiny, just a bedroom and kitchen with barely enough space for my bed and a couch, but the windows face east and morning light fills the whole room, and that feels important somehow. I pack my stuff from Mom's apartment in 2 trips and don't take anything from the old house except my clothes and laptop. Moving boxes into the new place takes most of Saturday, and by evening I'm sitting on the floor eating pizza from a box because I haven't bought furniture yet. Galina's office is only 15 minutes away, and I go every Tuesday at 6, sitting in her small room with the plants on the windowsill and working through everything that's happened. She doesn't try to fix anything or tell me how to feel, just asks questions that make me think about stuff I've been avoiding. We talk about Dad and what it means to love someone who did something terrible, about guilt and responsibility, and how those aren't always the same thing. Dad's case moves through the courts slowly with hearings and motions and legal stuff I don't fully understand, and I keep the no-contact order in place because talking to him right now would just confuse everything. Mom updates me sometimes about his situation, but I ask her not to tell me too much because I need space from all of it. The boundary feels weird but also right, like I'm protecting something important by keeping distance. 6 months after finding Sarah, I wake up early one morning and decide to record one last voice memo for myself, pressing the red button on my phone and speaking quietly so I don't wake the neighbors. I say that nothing is really fixed or resolved, that Dad's trial is still pending and Josie still grieves, and I still have hard days where I can't stop thinking about that toy box. But the truth isn't buried anymore, and I'm sleeping through whole nights now in this small, safe place where nobody died in the backyard. I'm learning that doing the right thing doesn't make you feel good necessarily, doesn't give you peace or closure or whatever people expect, but it's still the right thing, and maybe that has to be enough for now. That's how it went for me. But what about you?
Tell me in the comments because your takes always change how I see these stories. I'll be scrolling through later, so don't hold back. Let's see who starts the next great debate.